We're in an IT class led by our professor, Mr. Eli Walker, and our task is to completely assemble a computer that is supposed to be pretty decked out. So we have all of our supplies here: a motherboard, graphics card, a heat sink, RAM, our power supply if I haven't said that already, a hard drive, and our processor right there on the table. And here's our case. So we can go ahead and start with the assembly process. Make sure that you line up the little triangle on the board. Then lower the retention arm and put it into place. It's done. Alright, so we have our thermal compound. We're just gonna put a little over a pea-sized droplet on the die. Very viscous stuff. In fact, I believe that is all of it right there. We may need to go get some more. And just a tad bit more. And that looks like it'll do. We'll go ahead and cap it, and then spread our thermal paste. Alright. Once it's finally spread, just place down your cooler, and we'll go ahead and screw it in. For these processors, as it's usually in your best interest to do just a little bit at a time when you're starting out on each corner. That we can go ahead and make sure that they're at least going to start screwing in. And then you can just go ahead and screw each side down. I believe each side a little bit. And now that our heatsink is now in place, we can just plug it in. I believe that's. Go ahead and slot it in at kind of an angle to make sure that your I/O shield lines up. Make sure that there's nothing in your way, like there is for us. There you go. Now that it's slotted in place, you can go ahead and screw them up. For us, there's quite a bit of them because it's a bit of a hefty board. So, I always like to start with the more important screws first. So now we're going to move on with installing our RAM. We're only going to install one stick for now because we want to just make sure that it's working, and then we can go ahead and max it out in a bit. I'll just install that in our first channel, which is right here. Of course, we can't get it because of our cooler, so we'll install it in the second channel. So next after that is our graphics card. Some graphics cards will need extra power, which ours does. It needs a 6-pin. We'll go ahead and install that in one of the few X16 slots. We can go ahead and add a few screws. 1, 2. Just to screw it down. 2 for redundancy. We do want it to be in there after all. Alright. Now comes the time where we have to hook up all of our case fans, all of the different various power connections. But first, before we do that, we need to actually install our power supply. So that process is also pretty straightforward. Just go ahead. Alright, there you go. Need our specific power supply screws. There we go. Once again, screw the screws in firmly, but we're not trying to torque it down to get it as tight as you possibly can to the point where you are literally struggling to turn the screwdriver. Don't want to damage any components, don't want to damage your case's paint, which can happen over time if you tighten it down too much. So here's a look at the board so far. It's got most of its components hooked up. Well, at least into the board, but we have to go ahead and make the rest of our connections. So this would probably be sped up. In any other circumstance, you'd want to worry about cable management, especially for performance, since all of our stuff is being air-cooled for this demonstration. But since, once again, this is a demonstration, we will not be doing that. But you'll want to make sure that you use, if you do have them available to you, these different little routing plates that go to the back of your case to make sure that you get as much cables out of the way of the fans as possible. You also want to make sure that there's not any loose cables dangling around that may or may not be able to come in contact with the fans themselves. Right down here, if you can see, you probably won't be able to. There are front headers for the case peripherals, which, like things like the power button, start. For our first test, we'll probably just be using our little start button that we have on our particular motherboard. Most motherboards may or may not have that, but we will eventually wire up the front I/O. So we need to now go ahead and plug in our CPU power. In our case, we need to plug in 2. We have both a 4-pin and an 8-pin. So now we go on the treasure hunt for an 8-pin. We've just linked up 2 PCI 4 pins. PCI 4 pins. Just 2 4-pin power connectors on out of the PCI. If you're ever wondering where any of your cables go, you can check your motherboard documentation. As far as I've ever seen, every single time you do buy a motherboard, it will come with some documentation. So you'll never be alone in this endeavor. Which, in our case, this is for the case, I believe. our motherboard there it is. Thank you. Our motherboard documentation's over here, and it will show everything, well, ours at least, will show you pretty much how to set up the whole motherboard together with all of its various components, different slots. It has most of the pins labeled. In fact, I believe that's all of them. And it'll show you what your jumpers look like in your pinouts, which is pretty handy. Go ahead and cut it.
Alright.
Is it going? Okay. So now that we've installed all of our cables and all of our devices, we basically have a fully functioning system now, except one thing. If you'll remember, we only installed just enough RAM for it to, like, post, which as you can see it has gotten to our post screen. So we're going to go ahead, power it down, install the rest of our RAM, and we should be getting towards the conclusion of this video. The complete mess.
If we're going to do parity, and if we're doing even parity, we look on over here and we see that we have one bit that's turned on this. Since we have one bit that's turned on, we then on our parity bit, the one bit and one is an odd number. And for our conversation, 0 is an even number.
Alright, so here we have our fancy UEFI BIOS. We got into the BIOS by using our default BIOS key, which is F2. It's a fairly common one, so if you don't know what it is and it doesn't show up on your screen, it's probably the first one I'd try for you. The main thing that we want to do is make sure that all of our RAM and all of our processors and of course our graphics card and everything is recognized by our BIOS. That way when we go to install our operating system, we won't be doing that in this demonstration, but if you're going to go on to install your operating system, you'd want to make sure that all of this is set. Our memory is right now clocked at 2133 megahertz. We have 16 gigs capacity, so that's fairly important. Actually, the first time we didn't recognize both sticks, which is why it's very good to test. So you always want to make sure everything's seated properly. If you go to our motherboard, has a tweaker option for clocking. As we can see, our memory can actually go up quite a bit higher than 2133. It can go up to 4200 megahertz. And as far as our core clock, I know that it can also be clocked up quite a bit too, above 4 gigahertz as well. As you can look, or as you can see in your BIOS, this is basically, as the name would imply, the basic input-output system. It's everything that you'd need for the most basic things to do in your BIOS, like especially things like boot order. In our BIOS, we just so happen to have a thermometer for CPU, so we can make sure that it's regulated. But yeah, that will conclude this video. Once again, this is a demonstration. If we were to do this as our own gaming rig, which this is oriented to be, we'd go ahead from this point, knowing that all of our things are recognized, we'd install our operating system, install all of our drivers for all of our devices, especially your graphics card. You want to make sure that you're utilizing that power that you paid for, or else you might as well have not spent it at all. Make sure that your computer does not look like a rat's nest like ours is, because cable management is crucial for airflow, and airflow cools your components, and you don't want anything to be thermally throttled. Want to go ahead and make sure that all of your front I/O is tested and working. Of course, for this demonstration, however, all we wanted to do was get into the post and show you the basics. So just be sure to do that if you were to do this at home, and I believe that would be all. So, this is going to be kind of the impromptu ending of this video. I noticed while editing it, I didn't exactly hit all the points I meant to. I did miss a lot, like for example, the components. I don't even think I mentioned their actual models, but the case was a Cooler Master H500 ATX mid-tower. We were using an 850 watt Rosewell 80 plus bronze power supply. We had 2 8 gig sticks of Trident Z G-Scale RGB series RAM, DDR4. Our our motherboard was the Asus ROG Crosshair Hero, and our processor was the Ryzen 7 1700 8-core 3 gigahertz processor from AMD. And we used the Cooler Master liquid cooler, not in the video, but it was a part of our parts list, so I thought it was worth mentioning. But as far as other things that I wanted to go over, we didn't, in the video, I didn't actually mention a couple of things, but you might have noticed them. Actually, I did mention one now that I think about it. But the first time that we went through, our RAM didn't, our second stick of RAM wasn't recognized. That was because we didn't seat it properly. We had to reseat it afterwards. That's why you always check your BIOS. In our case, it should have been blatantly obvious because it wasn't even lit up. But other than that, our second problem was in the BIOS. We didn't check to see if I mentioned it, but we didn't really like explicitly check to see if our GPU and everything was recognized. It should have been obvious because we were running it off of the GPU, but if you were running it off of onboard for some reason, you always do want to make sure that you've checked to see if it is being recognized. Another thing, which I'll also have down on the sheet, it's in the requirements of this video that we go over a lot of our safety precautions. In the video, I didn't mention it, but we did have a C-class fire extinguisher. You must be sure that whenever you are building a PC anywhere, at your house, at a place of work, that you have a C-class fire extinguisher within arm's reach. For us, if we did have a fire, we could run directly outside our door, and there was a fire extinguisher right around the corner. So just always be sure that you're taking the proper safety precautions. As far as other safety precautions that we did have, and for us and for the components, we had a mat to stand on that was keeping us grounded, as well as an ESD strap and non-magnetic tools. You do want to make sure that they're non-magnetic, as some components are magnetically sensitive. Definitely don't want to kill some components just because you were using a magnetic screwdriver. Have a bad day. As far as the rest of the video goes, just like little nitpicky things that I felt I didn't really tackle well was the installation. I did skip around a lot for the sake of the video, but it took around 20 minutes, I think, total to put that thing together. We did have to do it over multiple days. Some things came up in class. We just never had an optimal time. In the second half of the video, where I mentioned it was a couple days later, you could tell that our professor was going through a couple of different lessons. We did have some stuff for an upcoming exam that we needed to go over, which is why the video was a bit out of sorts, you could say. But other than that, let's see if I'm missing anything else here. Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I did mention this, but if we were going to set up Windows, I believe the way that is usually best for most people, if you don't have a CD especially, is that you just go to the Microsoft website. You can download Windows 10 and put it on a formatted USB stick. You just set the USB stick as a bootable device if your motherboard supports such functionality, and you could just install Windows right off the USB stick. As well as if I were to install drivers, I would either get them from the manufacturer's website or I would install them off of my USB. You know, knowing that the drivers are correct and that we wouldn't be using any false drivers that could damage our components, because that is something that I do believe could happen. As far as sound went, we did not have a sound card because those are outdated by now, or at least by today's standards. So everything was on board. Anything that we didn't have a PCI extension for was on board. Technically our graphics were on board, but I don't think you want to be running off of an APU when you could have a graphics card. Some things that you do want to note while buying components is that you don't want to buy something that could set your system back. And what I mean by that is that you don't want to have components that bottleneck each other. as we say in class, I believe it's rule number 3, your computer is only as fast as its slowest component. If you had, say, slow RAM, but, you know, the rest of your components were lightning speed, it wouldn't really matter because, once again, your computer's only as fast as its slowest component. So do make sure that you don't make any hasty decisions, like you spend that extra $200 on a GPU that your computer can't even really utilize because of its components that are holding it back. Other than that, another safety thing is ventilation. You do want to make sure that in case there is a fire, that you're properly ventilated and that you're not going to clog the room with smoke. So in the case of a fire, always make sure that you have, you know, whether it's a window, a door, anything open. You do not want to be locked in a room with a fire going. You don't want to breathe that stuff in. It's no good. Spooky smoke. And other than that, I believe I also mentioned this, I did not plug in the I/O ports for the front. Obviously you would want to do that if you're using this computer every day. It'd be a little, be going out of your way just to plug something into the back of your computer, whether it be like a USB device, you're just plugging in a different, whatever. You just want to make sure that you have everything plugged in. You don't want to waste what you've already bought, like I said. Things cost a lot of money, especially computers. But other than that, I believe that covers it. Let's see. Yeah, I guess that would do it. I suppose one last thing to mention is that if you have bought a board from, say, like a big manufacturer, like that's HP branded, Dell branded, your boot screen will not show the little America Mega Trades that ours did. It will probably be like an HP splash screen, is what I've seen in most cases. Just whatever brand it came from, it's probably going to be on the splash screen. So if you don't know what to look for, and you're confused why you didn't see an America or American Mega Trades symbol on yours, it's just because our board did not come from a designated manufacturer. It came from, actually came from the base manufacturer itself. It was a Asus board. So that's why that was like that. Other than that, you do want to be sure that depending on what operating system you do install, that the software that you'll be using, such as, even games, will be compatible with your operating system, which is a big thing. And also that your operating system is compatible with a lot of your components. I know that it's a common early mistake that people like to buy a 32-bit operating system for their computer because it's a little bit cheaper, but do note that for a 32-bit operating system, you cannot recognize more than 4 gigs of memory. So that would also be wasting your money to get a 32-bit operating system. Also, a 64-bit operating system will allow your computer to run at its fastest capacity. It will feel a lot smoother. Just get a 64-bit operating system. Other than that, let's see. I know, I keep on adding on to the pile. I'm really trying to make sure that I include everything, just in case someone uses this as a reference. As far as your hard drive goes, do be sure that while you're installing your operating system, you have the boot order selected properly. That will be in your BIOS. I did go over how to get into your BIOS in the video. As far as our installation plan, this is also something that sort of bugged me, is that we didn't go over it, but we had all of our stuff plotted out on our desk. You do want to be sure that you have a plan of what order you want to do things, that way that you're organized and you don't waste any time fiddling with a sheet of paper, or, also be sure that you know where everything, like all of your jumpers, all of your, everything on your motherboard, where you plug stuff in. Another mistake that you might have noticed before I fixed it was I plugged, which I guess I was having a bad day, I plugged in the CPU fan to the rear case fan, which you definitely don't want to do. Like I said, our BIOS has a thermometer in it. Not your thermometer in the BIOS, but our CPU has an available thermometer, and you want to be sure that while your software is regulating the fan speed, that you do, like, that it's regulating it to the correct fan. Like, if your processor's getting hot, it will rev up your fans. You don't want it to rev up your back fans instead of revving up your CPU fan, because you're gonna have a bad day. If your processor does overheat, it's no bueno, no good. It will crash, trust me. Also, another thing, be sure that you have your proper heatsink for your CPU. You don't want it to overheat in that regard. And other than that, I believe that would conclude all of the bases I wanted to touch down before the end of this video. I hope this was a great resource for someone out there. I hope that after watching this video, you do feel empowered to throw your own computer together, to do it yourself, whether you do this for a living, whether you do this at home as a hobby, whether you just like to save a couple bucks instead of buying a pre-built. I just hope that it was valuable for someone. Thank you, and thank you for watching.